For today's sermon, I want to focus on today's passage from Luke. Jesus' words to them starts off with a parable about a rich man and his crops. Then he talks about worrying and toiling and spinning, and talks about the birds and the flowers. And then finally he talks and tells them about the coming of God's kingdom and about caring for one another, giving alms. So first I want to look at the parable of the rich fool. We're told that this man's crops that year produced abundantly. You know, I think every year when you're farming, you're not sure if the crops will be good, just enough for your family, or maybe there's extra that you can go out and sell, or if there's not enough even to eat. But we're told that his land that year produces abundantly, more than he can even eat for feed to his family or even to sell. So instead, he stores them in an even larger barn. He tears down his old barn and builds a new one. He tells his soul that you will have ample goods laid up for many years, so relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Sounds like a good plan, right? You see, this farmer, this rich man, he has all the right business sense. You see, if there's an extra abundance in his crop that year, if he sells it, then the price of his product will go down because there's a lot of supply, so then the price will naturally go down. So he does the smart business thing to do. He stores it for another year, when perhaps the next year, when the crops aren't so good, he will have enough to sell. And I think in this parable, it's not ultimately necessarily about money. I think a lot of times we focus and we hear that there's a rich man and we focus on that. But I think more important, more disturbing and about the story of the rich man is that God is nowhere to be seen in his life. His decision to store his crops for the next year, to tear down his barn, to build an even larger barn, all of these things, and he makes this long-range plan about what he will have and what he will do in the coming years. He does all of this, and not once does God come into the story. But then God comes in and interrupts his plans. I'm not sure if any of you have had a moment like that where it seems like God interrupts your plans. God comes in and tells him, right after, you can just picture, right after he's met with the architect, planned out the new barn, he's thought about, well, maybe if I have enough money, maybe next year I can buy this. And he's thought of all these things, and he sat down after a nice day of planning, and God comes to him and says, this very night, your life will be taken of you. In that moment, he is forced to take stock. He's forced to take stock. God asks him, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? You see, up until that moment in this parable, the rich man is just thinking about himself. He makes his plans for himself. He doesn't think about others. And so in storing up the crops for another year and selling them when maybe the food is more scarce, he's actually hurting other farmers who may not have been able to store up crops. What he's doing is actually going to hurt the local economy and maybe even push others out of business. So he's thinking only about himself, that he wants to be able to relax, eat, drink, and be merry. It is hard when God interrupts our lives like he did with the man in the parable. In these moments, we're forced to reflect, to take stock and think about who we are, who we've become, of all the things that we have done, and as well, all the things that we have left undone. For the rich man, he reflects and can only think of the crops he's had and the success he's had financially. But God reminds him that, in this paradoxical way, that the physical things he's accumulated are in fact ephemeral, that they're fleeting, that all he has been pursuing is wealth and security, and that they're temporary. Now, don't get me wrong. I think for some of us, we might have grown up in families where our parents lived paycheck to paycheck. Or maybe we're in a position like that now. Or we are familiar with what it means to not have enough. So don't get me wrong. I don't think not having enough is good. But at the same time, I think our lives can sometimes get so consumed by making it day to day or year to year, or wherever we are in our lives. We can be so consumed with making it, with being secure, and pursuing that dream, that there comes a time when we're interrupted by God, and God asks us, "Where am I in your life?" And in those moments, we're forced to realize that we have not been living for God, that we have not been living for the kingdom that Jesus talks about in today's passage. I saw this movie that came out a couple years ago, and it's called Thank You for Smoking, and the main character is a lobbyist who is seemingly without any morals, and he's a lobbyist, and he just argues the point, not necessarily believing in it or not. And he says, if you argue right, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. And throughout the movie, you see him questioning sometimes. And when people ask him, why are you doing this? Why are you doing something that you in your heart even disagree with? He says, well, you have to pay the mortgage somehow. You have to pay the mortgage somehow. And I think when I thought about that, I realized that our lives are like that sometimes. That we're so focused on whatever that is, whether it's paying the mortgage or whatever it is in our lives. I don't know if you have children or wherever you are in your point in life, that sometimes there are things that take over our lives, where we're working 9 to 5 or even more, and that becomes the center of our lives. We find that we look back and we realize that we have less and less time for family. We have less and less time for the things in life, that give us happiness, that bring us love. We have less and less time for God. So the reason why Jesus calls the rich man a fool isn't that he has a lot. It's not that he isn't in a position of want. But rather, it's because he's simply so focused on caring for himself that God is no longer in the picture. Like the fool in the parable, our lives are often caught up in pursuing the temporary things of this world at the neglect of heavenly treasure, everlasting salvation, and the assurance of God's forgiveness. But are not these things the things that truly matter in life? I remember when I was going through seminary, every year I was just getting more and more into debt. Every year, I'd had money to buy food, but I soon learned that loans aren't really income. It's almost like double debt because you're spending what you're owing. And so that was a life lesson I had to learn, that loans weren't really income. And after a while, I found myself getting so consumed about making sure, balancing, what passed for a budget for me, which I guess probably wasn't a real budget. But I was so consumed about making sure that I wasn't spending too much, trying to cut down on things and also finding some work to do on campus, that's all that shaped my life. Everything about my life was shaped around my debt or my student loans. That's what my life became surrounded by. And there are all kinds of things like that that can take over our lives. Sometimes, whether that's work or different passions we have, that they become the thing that our lives surround, that take the place that God should have in our lives. This week I was really moved by all those who helped out, everyone who helped out with VBS, but especially those who had to take off work for that, who used vacation days. Because I think in those moments, there's one logic which would say that's not the wisest use of your time. You could be working. You could be working right now, or you could have been saving that vacation for something else. But in moments like that, and making that choice to say, well, for this week in the morning, I'm going to make a choice to help out with VBS, that we place the kingdom first. It's in those moments where we say our jobs will not be the Lord of us, that our security will not be the Lord of us, but that instead we will seek the kingdom first, beyond our comfort. See, at stake in today's passage it's a question of priority. So instead of having to focus all our energy on making it day to day to secure ourselves in this physical world, God calls us to rely upon Him. Jesus points to the ravens and the flowers of the field who neither toil nor worry, yet God provides for them. You see, the opposite of this worrying is faith. In today's reading from Hebrews, he talks about Abraham and how he left his family and moved out to the inheritance that God had set out before him. Can you just think about how scary that is? To leave your family, to leave everything you know, and to go out into the wilderness following after God. There is no security in that. There's only faith. And like Abraham, we are called to step out daily in faith. I think sometimes we find ourselves, in one sense, emotionally addicted to worry, where worry can consume our thoughts, where we have to keep busy every single moment, because in those moments when we're left alone in our thoughts, all we can think about is worry, whether that's about finances or how our family members are doing, or worrying about health problems, or whether the various issues and struggles that everyone faces day to day. It's easy to get consumed by those things. Instead, God calls us to a life of prayer, of reliance. It's not that problems magically go away when we're people of faith. Raise your hand if you have problems in your life. If you're a person of faith, it doesn't mean your problems go away. Rely on God, to have faith, to pray, to turn to God when we're in times of trouble. It is only when we rely upon God that we're truly free to seek the kingdom of God. It is by first putting God in the center of our lives, making God and the kingdom our priority, and in relying in Him, that we are freed from worry. And go back when you're home later and read that passage again and see how many times the word worry comes up. It's worry, worry, worry. So my prayer for us this week is simply to go out being people of prayer, people who place the kingdom first. Your problems might not disappear. Your problems might stay. But the difference is that God becomes with us. God carries us, and we can learn to trust in God's providence and not in ourselves. Let us pray.